So imagine being cast in the biggest movie franchise in history. Like, we're talking a massive global sci-fi juggernaut.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But here's the catch. You aren't hired for your acting chops at all.
Wait, really? Then why are you hired?
You are hired purely because you look so much like another actress that literally your own mother cannot even tell you apart when you're both in makeup.
That is wild.
Right. You are quite literally brought on to just be a human prop, like a decoy.
God, I mean, it's the ultimate lack of agency, isn't it? You're on, the biggest set in the world, and your entire job is literally just to stand there and be a visual stand-in for somebody else's talent.
Exactly. And welcome to the deep dive, by the way. Today we are unpacking how a person goes from being that literal human decoy to taking absolute unapologetic control of her career.
And her image and her life, honestly.
Yeah. We're talking about Keira Knightley. And looking through her background, what really struck me is that this isn't just, a story about making movies. It's really a masterclass in how to survive an incredibly toxic environment. We're looking at a kid diagnosed with severe dyslexia who faced this absolute whiplash of overnight megastardom, right? And she survived a mid-2000s tabloid culture that pushed her to the very brink of a mental breakdown.
Which was so brutal back then.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And she ultimately figured out how to weaponize the very stereotypes placed upon her. So for you listening, this is a fascinating journey.
And that's exactly why her story feels so remarkably relevant to anyone navigating a high-pressure environment today. Because, I mean, we usually just see the glossy magazine covers, right?
Yeah, the red carpets and stuff.
Exactly, the designer gowns, the Oscar nominations, and we retroactively assume it was this smooth, calculated glide to the top. We sort of strip away all the friction, but Knightley's friction is actually the defining feature of her success.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the fact that her very existence and even her name are basically happy accidents.
And I love this part of the story.
Right. So her parents were in the theater world. Her dad was an English actor, her mom a Scottish playwright, and they were pretty broke.
As theater people often are.
Yeah. So her father made a bet. He basically told her mother he would only agree to have a second child if she managed to sell a script first.
Which she did, thankfully. She sold the script, they had a daughter, but the accidental nature of her beginnings didn't really stop there.
Oh, the name thing.
Yes. Her mother, who actually happens to be dyslexic herself, went to register the birth and misspelled the name on the certificate.
You can't make that up.
You really can't. She meant to name her Kira, like Kira, after this Soviet figure skater her husband admired, but she accidentally wrote the E before the I, creating the spelling Keira.
So literal day one, things are slightly off script, but I mean, it gets much harder. Because at age 6, Knightley herself is diagnosed with dyslexia.
Right, severe dyslexia.
Yeah, the school classified her as having, quote, special educational needs. She was a remarkably slow reader. But wait, I have to pause here because this really confused me when I was looking through the source material.
Okay.
Well, if she has such profound dyslexia that she can't easily read text, how on earth does she function as an actor? Like, table reads are the absolute core of the industry. You get handed script revisions on the day of shooting. How does she do that?
It's a fantastic question, and it really speaks to the hidden mechanisms of her daily life. To this day, as an adult who literally reads scripts for a living, she has stated she cannot confidently read out loud sight unseen.
Wow.
Yeah, so the workaround is just an astonishing amount of rote memorization and intense preparation.
Oh, so she just pre-learns it.
Exactly. When everyone else is casually reading through a scene at a table read, she has already spent hours privately memorizing the phonetic sounds and the rhythm of the dialogue. She essentially has to pre-learn the entire script just to participate in a basic rehearsal.
God, that sounds exhausting.
It is, but it also built this incredible work ethic from a very young age. And we see the first glimpse of how her environment shaped her drive right there.
Because of her parents, right?
Yeah. Her parents knew she was obsessed with acting. She had been begging for a talent agent since she was 3 years old.
3.
Right. So they used that desire. They used the promise of getting her an acting agent during the summer holidays as the carrot, basically, to encourage her to push through the immense frustration of learning to read.
It's a brilliant parenting hack, honestly, but it also sets up this wild irony for her early career because, after all that hard work learning to read scripts, her first massive global exposure wasn't really about her acting or her reading at all.
No, not at all.
It was the human prop scenario I mentioned earlier. In 1999, she was cast in Star Wars, Episode I. She played Sabe, the handmaiden and decoy for Natalie Portman's character, Padme.
What's fascinating here is that the visual resemblance was the entire point of the casting. Her own dialogue was even dubbed over by Portman in the final cut of the film. Yeah, she had zero creative input. None.
And from that total lack of agency, we entered this wild phase around 2002 and 2003. Now, if I'm looking at her resume from the outside, I'd say, wow, what a brilliant strategic move.
Right, like it was all planned.
Exactly. You do a quirky indie hit with Bend It like Beckham, and then you immediately pivot to a massive blockbuster with Pirates of the Caribbean. But digging into her history, I really have to push back on the idea that there was any master plan here. This was just catching lightning in a bottle twice.
Oh, there was absolutely no master plan.
Yeah.
You have to look at the massive disconnect between her expectations and the reality of these projects.
Right.
Like for Bend It, like Beckham, she goes through 3 months of intense, bruising football training. But she's actively telling her friends, I'm doing this girl's soccer movie, it's embarrassing, nobody's ever going to watch it.
She thought it would flop.
She fully expected it to be a total non-event that would just disappear straight to video.
And instead, it becomes a massive global hit that completely shifts the cultural conversation around women in sports.
Yeah. And then there's Pirates. She's cast opposite Johnny Depp and Orlando Bloom in a movie based on a Disney theme park ride.
Which sounds crazy at the time.
Right. Today we know Pirates is a billion-dollar property, but back then, movies based on rides were considered absolute industry jokes. Even with a $135 million budget, everybody, including Knightley herself, expected it to be a spectacular failure.
She thought her job was just going to be sitting around in carriages wearing pretty dresses while the boys swung from ropes.
Yeah, but that's where her grit kicks in, doesn't it?
Exactly. She gets to set, realizes what kind of movie it actually is, and instead of retreating, she just throws herself into the physical reality of the role. She's standing on a plank for 2 days straight over the ocean. She is actively refusing a stunt double for fight scenes.
Wow.
And against all industry odds, the film doesn't flop. It grosses $654 million worldwide.
Which means she goes from a teenager expecting her movies to bomb to the face of one of the biggest franchises in cinema history, basically over a single summer. And that speed is the problem. She completely bypassed the normal struggling actor phase. Usually an actor builds a thick psychological skin during those years of rejection, terrible auditions, and, small-scale failures. You learn how to handle the industry before the industry is looking at you.
That makes a lot of sense.
But Knightley didn't get that buffer. She was thrust directly into the blinding, unforgiving center of early 2000s global celebrity culture, entirely unprotected.
Unprotected is the perfect word because it leads us right into the darkest part of her journey. From the outside, the mid-2000s look like an absolute fairy tale for her.
Oh yeah, hits on hits.
She does Love Actually, which instantly becomes a modern Christmas classic. She gets cast as Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice and earns a Best Actress Oscar nomination at the age of 20.
20? That's so young.
But that exact stratospheric rise triggers a truly devastating backlash. We always hear about how toxic the 2000s tabloids were, but what made it so specifically brutal for her?
Well, you have to look at the actual financial mechanics of the paparazzi economy at that time.
Okay.
Photographs of young, famous women looking distressed, angry, or exhausted were highly lucrative commodities. Magazines paid huge bounties for images of women breaking down.
Ugh. That's sickening.
It really is. And because Knightley was suddenly everywhere, she became a primary target. The research points out that the mid-2000s press directed an, quote, extraordinary amount of vitriol at her.
Yeah, I read that. If they couldn't attack her acting, especially after she was Oscar nominated, the tabloids would simply attack her person.
Exactly. They heavily scrutinized her body, claiming she was too posh or too thin. The media built her up into the ultimate English rose purely so they could profit off tearing the petals off.
The cognitive dissonance she must have felt is just staggering. On one hand, she's winning polls, right? She's topping FHM's 100 Sexiest Women in the World list in 2006. On the other hand, internally, she is collapsing.
Completely collapsing.
The biography notes that despite all these accolades, she suffered from intense imposter syndrome, feeling like she, quote, didn't know her trade.
And the pressure of pretending to be this perfect, polished star, while feeling entirely inadequate, combined with literally being chased down the street by grown men with cameras, it broke her.
By age 22, she suffered a severe mental breakdown. She's diagnosed with PTSD, struggling to adjust to the constant threat of the paparazzi and the sudden stardom.
It reached a point of profound, paralyzing isolation. She didn't leave her house for 3 straight months.
For 3 months.
Yeah, leading up to early 2008. She was so incapacitated by panic attacks that she required hypnotherapy just to be able to physically walk out the door and attend that year's BAFTA Awards.
Where she happened to be nominated for her incredible work in Atonement.
Exactly.
There's a quote from a 2025 interview she did with Caitlin Moran that just stops you in your tracks. She's talking about how she kept from developing an addiction under that level of pressure, and she bluntly says, "Oh, I did go mad. Believe me, I went mad. I just managed to hide it."
That is so dark.
It is. So imagine you are the listener right now. What does this all mean for someone who is literally at the peak of Hollywood? You have all the success, the money, the massive franchises, the critical acclaim, but your daily reality is being trapped inside your own home. How do you actually survive that without walking away from the industry entirely?
You survive it by systematically reclaiming the narrative. And the way she did that is, I think, one of the most brilliant pivot strategies in modern acting.
How so?
Well, she realized she couldn't control the paparazzi hovering outside her door, and she couldn't control the tabloid headlines, but she could completely control her work.
Right.
And strangely enough, she found her salvation by leaning heavily into the exact genre the public expected from a so-called English rose, the period drama.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. I look at this phase of her career, all these historical films, as a massive Trojan horse.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, she gives the audience the exact aesthetic they want. She gives them the beautiful estates, the historical settings, the sweeping romances. She literally straps herself into the corset. But inside that corset, she starts delivering these fiercely feminist, highly psychologically complex performances that are actually critiquing the very cage she's acting within.
That's a phenomenal way to frame it. She uses the period piece to explore the suffocating nature of societal expectations. Look at her dominance in this space. She does Atonement, wearing that iconic emerald green dress that is now considered one of the greatest costumes in film history.
Oh, absolutely.
She does The Duchess, playing an 18th century aristocrat whose life as a celebrity and political influencer is destroyed by public scrutiny and a lack of personal freedom, which, perfectly mirrors Knightley's own isolation at the time. She does Anna Karenina.
And she's completely self-aware about it. She explicitly states in interviews that she appreciates the, quote, overt cage of period films. She uses the historical restriction of those costumes and societies to demonstrate how women are either forced to negotiate proper womanhood or how they fundamentally crack under the weight of it. She is taking her real-world trauma of being caged by the media and exploring it safely through these historical characters.
Exactly. It's a mechanism for processing her own reality. And it allows her to transition from being a passive object on screen, like the decoy in Star Wars or the damsel in early Pirates, to an active, demanding presence.
We really see that evolution peak, don't we?
We do, especially when she earns her second Oscar nomination for The Imitation Game in 2014, playing the brilliant cryptanalyst Joan Clark, who has to fight to be taken seriously in a room full of men.
Right.
And later in 2018, playing the French author in Colette, exploring a woman whose creative work is literally stolen and exploited by her husband, but who ultimately fights to reclaim her own voice. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a masterclass in taking artistic control. By the 2010s, she states she finally regained her confidence and felt she had truly learned her craft.
Which naturally means that the artistic control she's wielding on screen starts to manifest in her real life off screen. You don't just figure out how to command a movie set and then go back to being a victim of the tabloids.
Definitely not.
She starts setting incredibly firm, unyielding boundaries regarding her physical body and her public image. Like, in 2014, she agreed to pose topless for Interview magazine. But she had a very strict, non-negotiable condition.
Which what?
They were absolutely not allowed to digitally alter her body in post-production. No making her look curvier, no smoothing out her flaws. She did it to explicitly protest how, as she put it, women's bodies are a battleground.
That takes a lot of guts.
Yeah.
She also began fighting back legally, which is a massive shift in power dynamics. In 2007, she sued the Daily Mail after they falsely claimed she had an eating disorder and blamed her for the death of an anorexic teenager.
And we really need to emphasize how huge that is. Libel laws in the UK are notoriously complex, and taking on a giant British tabloid like the Daily Mail is a massive financial and reputational risk. It is a David versus Goliath scenario. Most celebrities just release a PR statement and hide.
But she didn't hide. She sued, she won, and she took the damages, added her own personal money to the settlement, and donated the entire sum to a charity for mental illness and eating disorders.
Wow, what a move.
It was a massive flex of power. She drew a hard line in the sand. As she gained more producing power, she also instituted a policy where she absolutely refuses to shoot nude scenes if the film is directed by a man. She cited the male gaze and prioritized her own comfort.
And to protect her family's privacy, she's married to a musician and they have 2 daughters. She completely opts out of the modern celebrity machine.
Yeah, she is just not engaged with it.
She has zero social media, no Instagram, no Twitter, no TikTok. She refuses to play the digital engagement game. And what's amazing is that it hasn't hurt her career at all. Fast forward to the 2020s, and she is still thriving.
Oh, totally.
She just got a Golden Globe nomination for the 2024 Netflix thriller series Black Doves, playing a spy. She's starring in major commercial campaigns like the 2025 Waitrose Christmas advert. She is working strictly on her own terms.
Now, setting those firm boundaries and operating entirely on your own terms also means deciding exactly how you engage, or more importantly, how you don't engage with modern cultural controversies.
Yes, and I want to pause here for a moment just to be completely transparent with you, the listener.
Mhm.
We need to touch on a recent project of hers that intersects with a major cultural flashpoint. The biographical research we are using covers her 2025 role voicing Dolores Umbridge in the Harry Potter audiobook.
Right.
And as many of you know, there is an ongoing, highly polarized boycott surrounding J.K. Rowling and her views on transgender people. Now, we must clearly state that we are not taking sides here. We are not endorsing any viewpoints from either the left or the right. We are strictly looking at this through the lens of Knightley's biography and just reporting the facts of the source material regarding how she reacted.
Exactly. And according to the background research, when Knightley was asked in an interview about the casting controversy and the boycott, she actually laughed and claimed she was completely unaware of the boycott beforehand.
Yeah, her exact quote from the source was, quote, "We're all going to have to figure out how to live together, aren't we? And we've all got very different opinions. I hope that we can all find respect."
This raises an important question about how legacy actors navigate today's landscape. When you have spent 2 decades building impenetrable walls to protect your mental health from media vitriol, when you literally do not use social media and you actively tune out the noise to survive, you rely entirely on those established boundaries.
Right.
Her response reflects a total, almost radical detachment from the modern digital outrage cycle. She simply doesn't live in that ecosystem anymore.
It's the ultimate culmination of her entire journey. When you step back and look at the full picture, we're talking about a dyslexic kid whose name was a typo, a teenager who was used as a literal visual decoy in a Star Wars movie, who stumbled backward into 2 of the biggest blockbusters of the early 2000s, expecting them to fail.
It's just wild to think about.
She got chewed up and spit out by a terrifyingly toxic tabloid economy, suffered a PTSD-inducing breakdown in her early 20s, and somehow managed to weaponize the very period piece corsets she was stuffed into to reclaim her artistic voice.
It is fundamentally a story about survival through boundary setting. It proves that you can reach the absolute pinnacle of your industry, look around, realize the environment is fundamentally toxic to your well-being, and instead of quitting, you completely redraw the rules of engagement.
Yeah.
She protected her sanity and her craft by refusing to play by the media's rules.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over. We live in a digital age where every professional, every public figure, and honestly, just regular people feel this immense crushing pressure to be hyper-visible.
Oh, constantly.
Right. We are told we need to be constantly accessible online, that we constantly need to manage a personal brand, to weigh in on every topic, to post our wins. But when you think back to that image of the glossy magazine cover we started with, maybe the real radical power isn't fighting tooth and nail to stay on the cover.
Yeah.
Maybe the most powerful thing you can do, like Keira Knightley opting completely out of the digital noise, is deciding you don't need to be in the magazine at all and just letting your work speak entirely for itself.